Hello, Calvary. And since we're going to be gone another month, I thought it prudent to not just drop the book of Acts where we had been speaking throughout the year. We're up through chapter 24. We've already spent just about a month away from the book of Acts. And so I wanted to catch us up and then each week bring us another chapter. Sorry to say, I'm not going to have all the fancy PowerPoint graphics. It's just going to be me chatting, but hopefully you'll find this brief walk through chapter 25 of Acts somewhat of interest to finish out these 28 chapters that we are nearly completed. So Paul's been arrested, beaten, goes on journeys, gets loved on, shares the gospel, gets arrested, back and forth. Religious leaders appear to hate him, and now he is finally under the Roman government authorities. And so he's in prison in Caesarea, and where we're at now is Felix, chapter 24, verse 27. When 2 years had passed, Felix was succeeded by Porcius Festus, but because Felix wanted to grant a favor to the Jews, he left Paul in prison. See, Felix was the Roman governor at that time and had been working through some things with Paul, and basically wanted a bribe to let him go. It didn't happen. He wanted to show favor to the Jews, and so as he gets replaced by a different governor, he leaves him in prison. And so Paul's left there 2 more years. Well, chapter 25. 3 days after arriving in the province, Festus went up from Caesarea to Jerusalem, where the chief priests and the Jewish leaders appeared before him and presented the charges against Paul. They requested Festus, as a favor to them, to have Paul transferred to Jerusalem, for they were preparing an ambush to kill him along the way. So the Jewish leaders meet with Festus in Jerusalem and state the charges against Paul all over again. They want Festus to send Paul to Jerusalem. Why? Because they want him dead. Because they, the religious leaders, were planning to ambush and kill him. Remember going back where Paul was actually transferred in chapter 23. It starts in verse 23, where the centurion found out about the plan to ambush and kill Paul. And he sent a detachment of 200 soldiers, 70 horsemen, and 200 spearmen to go to Caesarea at night. God's sovereignty. How cool is that? God's sovereignty means God's in control. And so God took care of Paul and kept him from being killed. Because remember, he was met by Jesus in prison and said, "You will go to Rome." And so, until God's done with us, we're not going anywhere. So be found faithful. In verses 4 and 5, and I hope you're reading along with me, it says, Festus answered, "Paul is being held at Caesarea, and I myself am going there soon. Let some of your leaders come with me, and if the man has done anything wrong, they can press charges against him there." God is sovereign, because God uses Festus to tell the Jerusalem religious leaders, no, Paul's not coming here. They would have to go to where Paul was in Caesarea, and then they'd have to present their charges all over again. Let's do verse 6 and 7. After spending 8 or 10 days with him, Festus went down to Caesarea. The next day he convened the court and ordered that Paul be brought before them. They all get back to where Paul is in Caesarea. Remember, he's a prisoner there. Festus opened up his court And the Jews make their case against Paul. And again, Paul was there to hear it. All the charges against Paul were serious, but not one of them could stick. They couldn't prove any of them. Verses 8 and 9. Then Paul made his defense. I've done nothing wrong against the Jewish law or against the temple or against Caesar. Festus, wishing to do the Jews a favor, said to Paul, are you willing to go to Jerusalem and stand trial before me there on those charges? See, Paul states his innocence. All the charges against Paul were false, but Festus wants to stay in good standing with the Jews, who could stir up trouble for him as the Roman governor, and asked Paul if he'd go to Jerusalem. Hey, I'll be the one in charge there. You stand trial before me there. But it was going to be in front of the Jewish leaders, who had already determined that Paul was guilty and deserving of death. It was a no-win situation for Paul. 10 and 12. 10, 11 and 12. Paul answered, I am now standing before Caesar's court, where I ought to be tried. I have not done any wrong to the Jews, as you yourself know very well. If, however, I am guilty of doing anything deserving death, I do not refuse to die. But if the charges brought against me by these Jews are not true, no one has the right to hand me over to them. I appeal to Caesar, says Paul. After Festus had conferred with his council, he declared, you have appealed to Caesar you will go. As a Roman citizen, Paul was brought up through the Roman court system, not the Jewish courts. He knows he's innocent, and by going to Jerusalem, he knows he'd be killed. So Paul makes a request to go to Caesar, to be put on trial before the top dog leader in Rome, Caesar. That was one of each citizen of Rome's rights, to appeal to Caesar. So Festus had no choice. As a leader within the Roman government, he was obliged to send Paul to Caesar. Verses 13 to 15. A few days later, King Agrippa and Bernice arrived at Caesarea to pay their respects to Festus. Since they were spending many days there, Festus discussed Paul's case with the king. He said, there is a man here whom Felix left as prisoner. When I went to Jerusalem, the chief priests and the elders of the Jews brought charges against him and asked that he be condemned. Well, this is the great-grandson of King Herod the Great, the one who killed all the babies at the time Jesus was born. King Agrippa and his sister Bernice came to Caesarea, and Festus told the king about Paul and what was going on with his case. 16 and 17. I told them that it is not the Roman custom to hand over anyone before they have faced their accusers and have had an opportunity to defend themselves against the charges. When they came here with me, I did not delay the case, but convened the court the next day and ordered the man to be brought in. Festus tells King Agrippa, hey, I've obeyed Roman law and been very helpful to the Jewish leaders. So he hasn't done anything wrong. 18 to 21. When his accusers got up to speak, they did not charge him with any of the crimes I had expected. Instead, they had some points of dispute with him about their own religion and about a dead man named Jesus who Paul claimed was alive. I was at a loss as how to investigate such matters, so I asked if he would be willing to go to Jerusalem and stand trial there on these charges. But when Paul made his appeal to be held over for the emperor's decision, I ordered him held until I could send him to Caesar. Because the accusations about Paul had to do with Jesus, they were religious in nature and not about breaking Roman law. He didn't know how to proceed. But Paul used his right to appeal to Caesar, so Festus is sitting there holding him until he can send him to Caesar. And we'll see why he's holding him. Verse 22. Then King Agrippa said to Festus, I would like to hear this man myself. He replied, tomorrow you will hear him. So verse 23. It begins, the next day King Agrippa and Bernice came in with great pomp and entered the audience room with the high-ranking military officers and the prominent men of the city. At the command of Festus, Paul was brought in. Since Agrippa was a king, there was a whole big deal about him entering the courtroom. Oh, yay, hallelujah. But in God's eyes, he's just another man in a leadership role. You see, God doesn't play favorites. You go to Romans chapter 2, verse 11, it says, for God does not show favoritism. And it says that elsewhere too. Verses 24 to 27. Let's finish it out here. Festus said, King Agrippa and all who are present with us, you see this man? The whole Jewish community has petitioned me about him in Jerusalem and here in Caesarea, shouting that he ought not to live anymore. They wanted him dead. I found he had done nothing deserving of death, but because he made his appeal to the emperor, I decided to send him to Rome. But I have nothing definite to write to his majesty about him. Therefore I have brought him before all of you, and especially before you, King Agrippa, so that as a result of this investigation I may have something to write. For I think it is unreasonable to send a prisoner on to Rome without specifying the charges against him. You see, Festus was concerned. Here he is, a leader in the Roman government under Caesar, and he's going to send a prisoner there. He doesn't know what to write. What laws against Rome has he broken? Yes, there's a dispute, a difference with religious leaders, but what Roman law has he broken? And they can't come up with it. So Festus says, King Agrippa, you can do this. You're the smart one. And so we'll see how it proceeds in chapter 26. Hope you enjoyed this, and hope you're excited about seeing what continues on in chapter 26. Hope to see you guys soon. God bless.